What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel for Webflow Pros. In today's video, we're actually going to do a crash course for beginners that's been requested for a while now. If you've never built a Webflow site before, follow along with me to build your first responsive landing page step by step. This isn't a replacement for all Webflow University has to offer, but I'll try to get you started quickly while learning some best practices I wish I knew when starting out. Check the links in the description for any assets you need, and let's dive right in. All websites are made up of a series of boxes within boxes. This is commonly referred to as the box model. At the basic level, we have sections, which group together related content on our page. Here we often apply background colors, images, or anything that should cover the full width of the page. Inside each section, we add containers. These keep our content centered on the site and from getting too wide. Inside each container, we add more boxes called div blocks, which group together related content. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Inside your Webflow account, hit the New Project button. We're going to create a blank site, and let's title this one Lander and hit Create Project. Now this is the designer view. We're going to come back to this view in just a minute, but for now, hit this Webflow icon at the top. We'll add in all the fonts we need. So we'll go to Project Settings, and we'll head over to the Fonts tab. And this is a list of Google fonts. Let's go ahead and type F and pull up this Falcoin font, and we'll apply the regular 500 and 600 weight and hit Add Font. And let's also pull up a font called DM Sans, and here we're going to apply regular and 700 weight and hit Add. And then let's go back to the designer view. So in the designer view, we're starting with an empty page. Let's start by adding a couple elements we'll probably need onto the page. So we'll hit this plus sign, the Add Elements panel, and drag a heading onto the page. This is kind of our H1 heading. It's what search engines read as the most important. We'll drag another heading onto the page and set it to H2. And we'll drag one more heading and set this one to H6. Under that, let's go ahead and drag some paragraph text. Let's drag in a button onto the page, and let's also drag a text link onto the page. These are the main elements we'll probably need to style. And then let's open up this navigator panel. So this is where we can see all of the elements inside our page. We're going to click this pin the navigator icon to leave this always in view. Our next step is to style some of these elements. So a lot of these text elements can actually be affected from the body element itself. So if we select the body, we can head over to the style panel, which is where we can affect the look of the elements on our page. We'll hit the blue plus sign and go to the body all pages tag. So we're affecting every page across our entire website. And here, if we change the typography, you'll notice that all the fonts inside are changing the typeface as well. So we'll select our main font called DM Sans. And then also if we change the color, the font colors are changing unless the color is being overridden on a particular element. In this case, we'll apply our main font color, which is 15, 15, 15, and hit enter. And then we can save this as a swatch by hitting the plus sign, and then we'll hit create so we can reuse this swatch later. We'll also apply a background color to our body. This is our main background color. And we're going to apply F6, F6, F6. And hit enter and hit the plus sign and then hit create. And now we can style our individual elements. So we'll go ahead and select the button and we'll give it a font size of 12 pixels, a font weight of bold. We'll open up the more type options and do all capital letters. We'll also do letter spacing of 2 pixels. And what you'll notice is it automatically created a class for us, which is saving all these styles so we can reuse these styles later on other elements. We'll go ahead and apply a border radius of 200 pixels. We'll apply a 1 pixel border, and for the color, we'll select our dark swatch that we already created. And we'll set the background color to transparent, and we also need to apply a font color of our dark color here. And then we can even add some padding, which right here we can type 32 pixels. Padding is the space inside the container. So if I add 32 pixels from the other side, you'll notice now the left and the right both have that padding. For the top, we'll just leave it at 9 pixels, and the bottom will be 9 pixels as well. So padding can be controlled here. It's the space inside the container. Margin is the space outside the container. So if I drag right here, you'll notice that the space between this button and the next element are being increased. That's the margin. We'll leave this set to 0 for now. We can even reuse these classes. So if I drag another button element onto the page, if I give it that class of button, now both of these have the same styles applied, and any change I make to one affects the other. but I could give this a combo class by typing right behind this main class. Let's go ahead and create one called dark. And what we're going to do here is change the font color to the light color, and we'll change the background color here to our dark color. And then now any changes we make to this one won't necessarily affect the first one. They're overriding the styles of the first one, but any changes we make to the first one will affect the second one. Let's go ahead and style all our text elements next. So instead of creating a class for each one of these and having to apply that class every time we add the element to the page, we're going to hit the blue plus sign and hit all H1 headings. Now we're styling every H1 heading that we add to the page from here on out. We're going to give it a top margin of 0 pixels, and we'll apply a bottom margin of 60 pixels. Let's also give it a font size of 105 pixels. Now right now, the line height is set to 44 pixels. This means if we add another line to this heading, they're likely going to collide into each other. What we could do is increase the line height, so that way we're spacing these apart, but if we ever reduce the font size on other breakpoints, we'll have to adjust the line height again. So I'm going to leave this set to 105, but instead of a pixel line height here, I'll click on the letters PX and change this to the dash. So this is a unitless line height. So now if I set 1 or 1.2, the line height will lock in place no matter what the font size is, and that's what we want. So we'll leave the font size set to 105 and the line height set to 1. Let's go ahead and apply our heading font, and we're going to select the normal weight, and we'll do a -5 pixel letter spacing to bring it closer together. Now we'll select the H2 and go to the all H2 tags, and here we'll go ahead and give a top margin of 0 pixels and a bottom margin of 48 pixels. We'll go ahead and select our heading font as well. This time it's going to be the medium weight, and we'll select a font size of 40 pixels and set the line height to 1.2. Next, let's go ahead and select our H6, go to the all H6 tag, and then here we'll apply a font size of 22 pixels. And for our unitless line height, we're going to go ahead and set it to 1.2. Let's go ahead and select our heading font, and we'll do a font weight of semi-bold this time. We'll do a top margin of 0, and we'll leave the bottom margin set to 10 pixels. Let's select the paragraph text and go over to the all paragraphs tag. Here we're going to apply 16 pixels, and then for the line height, we're going to set it to 1.6. We'll set the bottom margin to 0. Finally, let's go ahead and select the link and head over to the all links tag. By default, the links are blue, but let's go ahead and select their font color to be black. And then we'll set their text decoration for the underline to none to remove that underline. Now that we have all our elements styled, we can go ahead and build out our page. So I'm going to select our element and hit the delete key, and we'll just delete all our elements off the page. And we're going to drag a new element onto the page, and this is going to be a section. And we're going to give it the class of section. And inside of that, we're going to go ahead and drag a container. And let's give this the class of container. And under max width, we're going to set 1920 pixels to be the maximum width that this container could possibly get. We'll also give it some left and right padding of 40 pixels, and we'll give it the top padding of 120 pixels to create some space inside this container. Now in the container, we'll drag our heading, and this will be an H1. And then underneath that heading, we're going to drag a link block because we need a clickable element. And these are just like div blocks, but they're clickable. And then what we can do is give this the class. We'll call it hero-link. So I'm going to name all my classes with lowercase letters and with a dash instead of a space. And then we're calling this hero link because it's inside of our hero section. So we can go ahead and select our overall container and give it a combo class of hero. So for this container specifically, we're going to give it a bottom padding of 0 pixels and a top padding of 190 pixels. With the hero link selected, let's go ahead and give it a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels. We'll scroll down under border and give it a 1 pixel border of our black color. And then we need to round it off, so we'll give it a radius of 200 pixels. And then we want to center align everything inside this container, so we'll select the container itself, and we'll apply a text align of center to center this up. Then we need to upload our images and assets, so we'll head over to this assets panel, hit the upload icon. You can download all these assets from the description in this video. There's a link. We'll just upload all these. And then we'll go ahead and drag in the arrow, and we'll give it the class of hero arrow. And let's give it a width of 26 pixels. Now we want to center align this arrow from top to bottom. So there's a couple ways we can center things from the parent element. So with the hero link selected, what we can do is apply flexbox, which is a layout setting, and we can align this to the center from top to bottom and justify to the center from left to right. So now this arrow is perfectly centered inside the parent. We could change the alignment at any point or the justification at any point here. But by applying Flexbox, now this is no longer respecting the parent's text align center. So if we still want to center this hero link, all we have to do is click this margin auto, the center button right here. It's going to apply margin auto to the left and right and center this element up inside. So underneath that hero link, we'll go ahead and drag in our hero image right here, and we'll give that the class of hero image. Now, so far, we've been selecting pixel widths for everything. So if I were to set this to 300 pixels, for instance, the width of this isn't changing when I resize the browser width. But we want this to span the full width of all the available space. So we'll give it a width of 100% and just type the percent icon. And now when we drag the browser in and out, what you'll notice is the width of this image is changing. And by default, since we didn't apply the height of this image is just scaling down as well. But we could set a fixed height here if we want. If I set 200 pixels for the height, the image gets really squished, but we can change its fit to cover so it just fills up the available space instead of stretching or squishing the image. I'll go ahead and apply a fixed height on this image of 600 pixels instead. And now when we drag in and out, the height stays the same, but the width is changing. To get this hero link to overlap the image, we need to use negative margin on it to push it down. Since the link is 100 pixels tall, we can give it a negative margin of negative 50 pixels to put it directly in the center of the image. And we want the link to stack on top of the image. And by changing the order over here in the navigator, we're just changing which one comes first, not necessarily which one is on top. So to make this one stack on top, we need to change its position from static to relative and give it a z-index. Z-index is kind of like your layer order in Photoshop, whichever one's higher or above. So if I give this a z-index of 1, because the image is 0, then this will stack on top. If I gave it a z-index of -1, now it would be behind the image. So we'll just leave it at a z-index of 1. And we'll give this the background color of our white color right there. And let's also quickly replace the text in our hero. So if you copy the text from the clonable project in the description of this video, you can just paste it in here. And that wraps up our hero section. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse this section, and we'll go ahead and drag another section right underneath it and give this one the class of section as well. And inside of that, we'll drag a container. And let's go ahead and give this the class of container. And inside that container, let's go ahead and drag a bit of paragraph text. Now this is going to be our dark section, so we can select the section itself and give it a combo class of dark, since this is where we want to apply our background color of dark, and we'll also apply a text color of white, so any text inside this section will automatically be white. We also want this image to overlap the container underneath, so we can select this container and give it a combo class of testimonial, since this will be our testimonial section. And then let's go ahead and give it a negative margin of -210, and then we'll just add 210 by typing a plus sign and then 210 to our top padding. So that way this paragraph text isn't overlapping our image. Now to get 3 testimonials stacking side by side, we're going to need to apply a grid to have these stacked side by side. So we'll drag a div block into our container, and let's give this a class of grid 3, and then we'll drag our paragraph text inside, and then with the grid 3 selected, we'll apply a display setting of grid. Now here we can affect the gap of the columns. That's how much space in between our columns. We'll set that to 20. And we can also affect the gap of our rows, how much space in between our rows. We'll set that to 80 for when our rows stack on mobile. For now, we'll add one more column since this will be a 3-column layout, and we'll delete this last row since we don't need it right now. Then I'll click outside of this area to escape my grid. And then we need to add in our quotation marks. So I'll go ahead and drag this image into the grid, and I'll give this the class of quote. Let's give it a width of 30 pixels and a bottom margin of 32 pixels. Now right now, this quote and the text is in 2 separate grids. And if I were to copy this quote and add another one to the grid, you'll notice that it's not staying in there either. These by default are just going to keep wrapping into new grid items. but we need to group them together in one grid, so we can actually just drag a div block inside our grid, and we'll give this the class of grid3-item, and then we're going to use this to group together the quote and the paragraph text. So we'll just drag both of them inside there. I'm going to go ahead and copy the text of this paragraph quote. I'm going to paste it into my design. And we also don't want this to span the full width of the entire grid item. So I'm going to give it a class of 90%. And we'll go ahead and set its width to 90%. So that way it just leaves a bit of space inside this grid item. Now we can go ahead and duplicate the grid item and right click one more time and hit duplicate to make 3, and let's change out the text. Now we'll go ahead and collapse this section, and we'll drag another section underneath, give it the same class of section, and then drag a container inside of that, give it the class of container. And inside this container, we're going to have a 2-column grid. So we'll drag another div block in, and we'll give this the class of grid2. We'll go ahead and apply grid to it, and we'll give it the gap of 20, and then for the rows, we'll give it a gap of 60, and then we'll delete the second row for now, and let's close it. We'll drag a div inside of our grid, and we'll give it the class of grid2-item, and then we'll go ahead and duplicate that item to have 2 of them. Inside the first grid item, let's go ahead and drag an image. We'll give it the class of grid2image, and we'll go ahead and set a width of 100%, a height of 420 pixels, and a fit of cover. Inside our second grid2 item, we're actually going to drag in this logo, and we'll give it the class of grid2-logo, and let's give it a width of 100 pixels, a bottom margin of 26 pixels, and let's lower the opacity to 50%. Underneath, we'll drag in a heading, and we'll set this to be our H2. We'll paste in the text, and underneath that, we'll go ahead and drag a button element and give it the class we already created of button. We'll change out the text, and now let's apply text align center to this, and we also want to center this from top to bottom. So just like we did before, we'll apply flexbox, and instead of having these stacked side by side, we'll switch it to vertical so they stack one underneath the other. We'll set the align to center and the justify to center. Now let's drag in our next section. So we'll collapse this one. We'll go ahead and add our next section to the page, give it the class of section. Go ahead and drag a container inside of it and give that the class of container. Inside this container, we need another 3-column layout. Instead of rebuilding a new one, we'll just drag in a div and use the same class as we created before. So this div goes inside our container. We're giving it the class of grid3, and it's going to be the parent element. And inside that, we'll drag another div, and we'll give this one the class of grid3-item. And inside that grid3-item, we'll go ahead and drag in an image, and we'll give this one the class of products image. And we'll go ahead and give it a width of 100% and a bottom margin of 40 pixels. Underneath that image, we're going to go ahead and drag in a heading element, and we'll set this one to H6. We'll paste in our text, and we'll drag in some paragraph text underneath that. And let's give this the class we already created called 90%. Let's paste in our text, and then we can select the entire grid item and right click and duplicate to make 2 more of them. Let's go ahead and hit the setting gear and change out the images. And let's paste in our new text. In this case, both of our containers have the same background color with equal amount of padding on the top, which is creating a larger gap than usual. To reduce that space, all we have to do is add a combo class of products to this one and give it a top padding of 0. Now things are looking consistent. Lastly, we just need to create our footer section. So I'll hit the collapse all for all of our sections and drag in one more section onto the page, and go ahead and drag in a container inside that section. We'll give the section a class of section, the container a class of container, and then we'll add a div inside that container for our footer line. Give it the class of footer line, and let's give it a width of 100%, and we'll give it a height of 1 pixel, and we'll give it a background color of our dark color. And then underneath that, we'll go ahead and drag in some paragraph text and change out the text. Now we need some clickable social media links on the other side. So we're going to drag in a link block in here, and we'll give this the class of link. Inside that, we'll go ahead and drag some paragraph text and give it the class of link text and change out the text. Let's add a little bit of padding inside this link to increase the clickable area. We'll add 18 pixels padding on either side, and we'll right click and duplicate the link and change out the text again and create one more copy. Now we need to group these all together so we can anchor them to the right side of the page. So we'll drag in a div and we'll give this the class of footer links, and we'll drag each of our links inside this div. We'll drag in one more div and it's going to go above the paragraph, and we'll give this the class of footer flex. We're going to drag the paragraph inside of there, and we'll also drag our footer links div inside, and then we'll apply flexbox to center align the text but justify them to space between, this option right here. That's going to put the paragraph text on one side and the links on the other side. We'll also give this last link a combo class of last that zeroes out this padding here, so that way it's perfectly aligned with the top line. We'll also apply a top padding of 40 pixels and a bottom padding of 40 pixels to our footer flex. And because this container has a lot of space that we don't need in the footer, we're going to give it a combo class of footer and add top and bottom paddings of 0 pixels to zero out that space. Now let's go ahead and create our nav bar. We'll scroll down to the bottom and drag a nav bar in to the top of our page. Let's give this a class of section with a combo class of nav, and then we'll use that combo class to set the background color to our white color instead of the gray. Inside the nav bar, we have a container, which we'll give the class of container. Let's apply a combo class of nav to this one as well, and let's reduce the padding to 30 pixels on the top and bottom. Inside the container, we have a link block that will give the class of logo, and then we can drag our logo image inside of that. Let's give this the class of logo image, and let's give it a width of 150 pixels. We also have our nav menu that's going to hold all our links. We can go ahead and give this a class of menu, and instead of restyling each one of the menu links, we can go ahead and just copy this link that we have down in the footer, and we'll go ahead and delete these out of the menu and paste the one from our footer, and then we'll just create a couple copies of it, and let's change out the text. And let's give this last one the combo class of last. We want our nav section to stay with us while we scroll down the page, so we can go ahead and change its position to fixed and anchor it to cover the full top of the page. And then we also will give it a z-index, which is kind of like our layer order of 1000 to make sure it's all the way at the top and it's above everything else. Now when we scroll up and down, we'll notice the nav is staying with us. Lastly, we just need to make everything responsive. So far, everything we've done has been pretty responsive. In fact, if we look at this on a 3000 pixel wide screen, we'll notice that our container has a max width that's stopping everything from getting too large, and all our content is nicely centered in the middle of the screen. Next, we can head over to the tablet breakpoint by clicking the tablet icon. Any style changes we make here will carry down to the lower breakpoints, but won't affect what we've done on the larger breakpoint. We'll start by reducing the font size, so we'll select the H1 font size, and we'll just reduce this font size maybe to something like 70 pixels. Now when we scale in and out, that's looking good. We may also reduce the height of this hero image to maybe 500 pixels to make it a bit shorter. When we scroll down, these are still looking good for our 3 column, and our 2 column even is still looking good here. And then these 3 columns are looking great as well. Our full width menu has been collapsed inside this hamburger icon, so we can go ahead and maybe give this some padding on all sides. Something like 5 pixels so should be good. We're reducing the padding a little bit. And if we head over to this settings tab and hit open menu, we can see what our menu is looking like. So we can select this menu class we already created and maybe give it some side padding of 20 pixels, and top and bottom padding maybe could be something like 50 pixels. And then also we can style how this looks whenever it's open. So for instance, I may give this a background color of dark, and I may give it a border radius of like 100 pixels to round it off. And that's looking good there. We may also select our main containers class that we have here and reduce the padding on all our containers across the whole site to 20 pixels. And that's just going to give us a little bit more space inside here. And maybe we'll even reduce the top padding to something like 90 and the bottom padding to 90 as well, to basically tighten this up a little. I'm going to select the hamburger icon and close the menu, and then we can head on down to the next breakpoint. So here everything is still looking pretty good. these are getting a little bit tight, so we may want to reduce this 3-column grid to a 2-column grid. So in the Style tab, we can edit our grid, and we can delete one of our columns. And when we do that, this will stack now, the 3rd column there. And because we made that change to this class, it's affecting these as well in this section here. We probably want to change our footer links to be 100% the width of the parent, which means we can grab the footer flex and just basically switch this to vertical so they stack one underneath the other. We'll want the copyright to be underneath the footer links. Now if we drag the order here, it'll affect the order on desktop, but if we just click this switch order or reverse switch, now that's going to switch the order for us without affecting the desktop view. We can also click on this footer links container here and add a bit of padding, and maybe even center align the text inside that container. While we're at it, let's check out how the mobile links are looking. Looks like we can add this padding of 18 pixels back into our last item here to make sure it's perfectly centered. And we'll close our menu again. Our 2-column grid is looking a little bit tight here, so we'll select our main grid and we'll go ahead and edit our grid and delete one of our columns. And now this content stacks underneath each other. Let's go ahead and tackle our last breakpoint. We'll select the H1 heading, and I'll probably reduce the font size a bit again, maybe something like 50 pixels, and even lessen the letter spacing a bit. And that's looking good there. I may go ahead and reduce the height of this yet again, maybe 400 pixels. And then here, this is getting a little too tight. We'll probably switch it to 1 column. So we'll edit our grid and delete one of the columns from here. And now these are full width. And that's looking great here. I may reduce the height of this image a little bit here. And that's looking good. I may reduce the font size on this H2 heading a little bit. Maybe we'll drop it down to something like 30 pixels. All this is looking good. And here we'll probably just stack our links. So we'll select the main link class and give it a width of 100% so they all stack one underneath each other. We may even add a little bit of padding on the top and bottom. And that looks great there. So we have our fully responsive site. It looks good on every breakpoint. And that's all set, fully responsive. All our content is stacking and good to go. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please consider hitting that subscribe button below so you never miss out on another video. I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.